looking at the fact that we all have prejudice within us, and it's not necessarily that we're bad people, it's just that prejudgment that we impose on others, which is never healthy, and it can create so much problems. So I have learned it. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Essence of May. So today I will be reviewing Desiree from Just Thinking Out Loud. I will be reviewing her response to the George Floyd incident. Now, shout out to the subscriber who sent me this link, who recommended Desiree's response to me, Desiree's review to me. I am really grateful for that because I now discovered Desiree and I found out that she's a fellow Jamaican, so big ups to Desiree. It would be quite interesting to know where exactly in Jamaica she's from, if she's a Kingstonian. A subscriber also recommended that I collab with Desiree. But again, Desiree is she's a well-seasoned YouTuber. She's been around for I think 4 years now. I myself have been here for a month. So, I'm still growing, I'm still learning, because YouTube, it's like uni. You learn every day, you improve, you advance. But definitely to my subscriber, I would definitely take up that offer if it presents itself, if Desiree is up for it. A good discussion, because I won't say a debate, because I believe that we can all learn from each other. A good discussion would be welcome if Desiree is ever up for that. Let's watch the video and I'll give my response.
Hi, welcome to Just Thinking Out Loud. My name is Desiree. I'm going to be giving my take on what happened with George Floyd and also discussing the public's response to that. I think there are two different perspectives you can have. One is sort of analytical and evidence-based surrounding the narratives, and then another one I think is spiritual. That's the only word I can use to describe it, and I think they're both important, and I'm just going to tell you what I think. Oh my god. So first of all, when this video surfaced on the internet, it's funny. People didn't immediately respond to it. It was like, oh, that happened? And then for me personally, and I think I noticed the same pattern in other people, it was the day after that you're like, wow, that's a really haunting image, and what it's showing is absolutely unjust, and it grates at my moral sensibilities. So that was the experience that I had. However, very soon after, you start seeing the narratives about Black Lives Matter come out and about how this is just an example of something that happens every day in the United States. It's a racist country with white supremacists everywhere, and Black people in particular are unjustly treated by the police. If you've watched any of my content surrounding these topics, you know that I definitely don't agree with that idea of the US being inherently racist or white supremacist. I don't believe in it, and I'm not going to go into it now. If you want, you can go and watch my past videos because they're pretty much still irrelevant. Now, this idea, the analytical side of it, where you can look at one particular incident and then get riled up by it and attribute that to the rest of society and say that this one thing, and the multiple ones that have been covered in the past in the news media, that represents what's happening in America is just flawed. And that thinking, I think, is the first issue that needs to be addressed when people are responding to it. One very emotional incident, yes, that should be addressed, even if it's one person. That's something you want to improve so that police officers or anyone who has that level of power over other people don't abuse that. It's difficult to do that because this is something that happens on the individual level. All the people there, not just the one police officer, but the other police officers and then the bystanders, everybody's making decisions moment by moment about what they do. There's a lot that goes behind why someone decides to become a police officer, what was happening leading up to that point in time, what's going on in their lives for every person involved, including George Floyd. So I have to say that in some ways, outside pressure in terms of training or narratives about the police, that has an influence, but I don't think you should forget the individual people. They're all meeting and there's a lot that they're bringing with them. So I think that's important to mention. The number of people who are killed by the police, I've been seeing this number about 19 white people in 2019 who are being killed unarmed by the police, and 9 for black people in the United States. Those numbers are extremely small, and you also have to put into the context of these policemen protecting a lot of black people from crimes committed upon them by other black people. And I think that it's important to realize, in general, people who are black are more involved with violent crime and they have more encounters with the police. That's backed up by data, just crime statistics. It's also backed up by data from witness reports, like people saying who they're interacted with, citing the race of the person. If you have one group of people having encounters with the police more frequently than another, they're more likely to be in armed conflict, and then bad things happen from that. So if you look at just police interaction and then look at how often, in terms of the police interaction, that people are killed by these police, often not just white, and you compare it to another group of people, not just whites, exist in the US, which is what I always say, but those are the groups people like to compare because of the historical context of that. There's not much difference. I saw someone on Twitter talking about how people only bring up all the white people who are the majority of those who are unfairly killed by the police when they're trying to deflect from what's happening to black people. When I heard that argument, I kind of flipped it on my head, because you could also say nobody cares about police brutality in general unless it's about black people. And I think that's not any worse than saying nobody cares about white people unless it's to deflect about black people. But if people are only focusing on police brutality when it's about black people, then do they really care about police brutality at all? Like, that's a question that you have to ask. If people are only paying attention, aren't all those other lives very important? I think they are. And that sort of goes into what I call the spiritual side of it. Identity politics is inherently selfish. It asks you to focus on the group that you're a part of, more so than other groups, because your group is being victimized. However, if you want, this is the point I really want to make in this video, if you want people to treat you well, you cannot be coming from a selfish perspective. Selfishness begets more selfishness. If someone is treating you badly and you decide to also treat them badly, do you know what's going to happen? They're also going to treat you badly. I know that sounds really simple. I know it seems unfair, but if you're trying to get people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you're trying to get people to see the humanity in you, you have to see the humanity in them. And I think that's really, as simple as it sounds, the biggest takeaway I've had from all of this, because there are people, a lot of not just black people, but white people who are advocating for black people, talking about making black people special. And I just don't think anything good can come from that. If you're only focusing on one group, by default, you're ignoring the rest of them. And I was talking about the analytical part of that. I don't think they're actually being treated more unfairly, but even if they were, you have to come together as a unit. And I see the Black Lives Matter movement as similar to the feminism movement, where I don't really see it as wrong for one group of people to say, oh, I want to focus on this aspect of my personality and help that. So if they want to focus on their feminine side and like analyze injustice through that lens, I think they can do that. I personally wouldn't join something like that because I think it's selfish. But I want to distinguish between people coming together as a community and then people using force, particularly through the state, which is what people advocate for in order to help those groups. I think that's where it turns really dangerous. So even though I'm not a fan of Black identity in general, I don't see anything wrong with people coming together as what they think of as a Black community and trying to help each other in that way. As long as it's done voluntarily, if you want to build up your community, I think it's okay if you do that. However, if you then ask society on a whole, which is, I think, supposed to be serving everybody in society, to focus on those groups of people, such as through governmental affirmative action programs, I think that's wrong. So that's where I'm coming from. A couple of other points I wanted to make. It doesn't really matter how he died. they've been coming out with two different competing reports about how he died, even though at the end of the day it came from lack of breath. But whether or not it was directly from the police or from stuff that he was doing, drugs, stuff like that, no matter what George Floyd was doing, the police, I don't think anyone should have that kind of power over another human being, but we do. That's how we've figured out how to live civilized in a civilized fashion together. And what I think would be better is, I think, too idealistic, if I'm honest with myself, but I do think that would be better. So we have police protect people. Sometimes police are doing good when they can, but that was a gross misuse of power. I think in the vast majority of cases that doesn't happen. However, I do think it's good for it to spark, just like I thought Black Lives Matter was great in terms of sparking people actually focusing on how often the police kill unarmed people, starting to actually track those statistics, which wasn't happening before. I think some good can come from this in terms of how police respond to body signals, for example, from victims or people that they're trying to help, especially under high pressure situations. And also remembering that police have mental health issues just like everybody else in the population. And I was talking to Tree of Logic about this, who's a former police officer, and she was saying that that cop probably had to deal with so many incidents with violent criminals, black, who don't treat them well. Her words are that you get disconnected and jaded and you don't care anymore, and I would call that as checking out. And think about it. If you have a group of people who they're serving these communities, like, this important to not forget that there are innocent people who are harassed and live in fear of criminals every day. Like, that's important to remember. The police are doing a job. But if you're putting these people out there who decide to serve, some of them for not good reasons, because people who have bad reasons to want to be in positions of authority will seek them out, but sometimes people have good reasons, and you're not specifically caring for their mental health in these types of situations, this is what will happen. So I think my personal suggestions, and I know there are many out there, are to take care of police officers, particularly mentally, because that's not something that you can be in a situation I think one person could be in for a long period of time and not disconnect. Like, you have to desensitize yourself in some ways. And then also, someone was mentioning to me, I haven't watched it myself, that Joe Rogan was talking about jiu-jitsu and learning body language of individuals and what it's actually communicating, and teaching that more to police officers. I see incidents like this happen again because of the things I've mentioned in this video. Accidents happen, the whole checkout phenomenon. But going back to my main point is that you cannot get love, which is really what Black people at least say they're asking for, from hate. And I think if you're being selfish, that is not coming from a place of love. That's how I see it. And also, in terms of the narratives, if you only look at particular incidents, that's not how you look at data and form a narrative around it. So I hope that that was helpful. I'm sure some of you wanted to hear what I had to say on the situation. Police brutality is something that should be dealt with, but I think the ways to deal with it are not through violent acts or even hateful acts. I think it comes from trying to take care of police officers counterintuitively, even though you're trying to rebel against them doing bad things. You need to help them reconnect to the humanity in themselves. And I think a lot of things would change if people do that. One more thing I wanted to mention was that you shouldn't put the actions of individuals onto groups. Statistical groups about patterns are not the same as individuals. And in a lot of media that I was seeing on Twitter in particular today, people keep talking about individuals like there's like an individual person on the screen. I'll try and show an example, but they say X people do this. Like, I see over and over and over again. No, there's one person doing something. Like, it's not this group of people, and I keep seeing that, not in one particular direction. And that mindset and thinking comes from identity politics, and it's inaccurate and contributes a lot to the division that we see.
First of all, guys, very good review by Desiree, and I want you guys to bear in mind, this is not me against Desiree or vice versa. This is just me giving my opinion, the same way Desiree gave her opinion based on her views and based on how her outlook on life. And I think we all have different outlooks on life, and this can be attributed to our bringing, this can be attributed to our association sometimes, and also this can be influenced by so many things. But again, it's just what you believe, and I think everyone has the right to their own beliefs. So what I will be doing is, for me, this is not a debate, it's a discussion, just to look at things she said and how I view that, and just to look at how different our perspectives are. Doesn't mean that I'm wrong or she's wrong. It's just based on perspective, and also I'll bring some factual evidence to support the statements that I will make, because in some of the things that Desiree said, it's not really accurate, and some of it is not necessarily black or white. There are so many varying factors. I've always said that. Some people look at something like statistics, when she spoke about 9 blacks being killed in America as opposed to 29, I believe. So 9 blacks being killed as opposed to 20 something white people being killed. But then when you look at the ratio, you cannot compare, because black Americans make up 13% of the population. So how can you compare 13% to the majority? So I think for me, this is something that we need to not look at just based on statistics of black versus whites. And even if you we're looking at statistics, black people are factually more likely to be killed by the police. And again, I think it even goes down further to not just being killed, but how that individual is being killed or how they have been dealt. So for many people, we hear conservatives talk about George Floyd being glorified, and people putting that death on as a display for inequality. But I think it's not necessarily that George Floyd was murdered. It was how he was murdered, being lack of oxygen, being lack of something that everyone deserves to have. And it was so cruel and vile and inhumane that people are disgusted and cannot believe that someone like Derek Chauvin exists. For Desiree, for you to say that there's no institutionalized racism, there's no white supremacists, it's also inaccurate, because you see where, yes, Derek Chauvin was the one who did the most, carried out the act, but we also had 3 accomplices that supported him in that behavior. So if you're looking at the ratio 1 to 3, then you look at that there's a serious problem, because clearly those officers that were with Derek saw that as the norm, saw that as a normal behavior to treat that individual person. Now we go on to the part of, is this racism or isn't it racism? And then you have to put both situations side by side, where you put a white individual and a black individual having encounters with the police. How are they treated in that situation? And you oftentimes see where a white individual would be seen as less threatening, and this is psychologically proven, and this is research based, where the white individual is seen as less likely to commit a crime or less likely to behave in an aggressive manner, but then the black individual is seen as more likely to behave in an aggressive manner. And then this also ties down to the way the individual is dressed at that given moment, etc. So for Desiree to say that these things don't exist, it's quite inaccurate. And even when we look now in America, where we're having the Black Lives Matter protests, and you see in the counter protests of White Lives Matter, what do you call that? Are you saying you're saying that's not supremacists, white supremacists, believing that black people didn't have a right to say what Black Lives Matter? So that for me was it's misleading, because again, you're saying this doesn't exist based on your experience. But what about the majority of black people who has experienced those negative aspects? So for me, I think in general, for me, again, the stats, you can't compare a 13% population to the majority. You have to, unless they're 50-50, then you can compare the deaths in that. And also, in an article carried out by the USA Today, it's been reported that there are more black people killed in America. It's just not reported. So again, it's about reporting and statistics, because in order for unharmed faith for police killings to be recorded, it has to be acknowledged as police killings. So what would happen is, if an individual is killed by the police, but it's seen as a justifiable homicide, then you would find that doesn't get added to the statistics. So again, there you have these issues with stats, because then it's not accurate, because it's based on perception rather than facts on that given day. But putting all of that aside, I want to look at a more broader issue, because for me, it's not about focusing on police brutality. It's about looking at the whole issue, because I think what this whole the George Floyd incident has led, it's just about police brutality, where, for me, that's not where my focus is. It's about the all institutionalized racism. For me, it's about what happens across the world towards a certain race. So for me, it's never just about pinpointing on police, because I am not against police. I myself served as a soldier in the British Army, and I'm a proud veteran. I'm proud to have served. You understand? It may not have been my country, but I'm proud to have served a cause. So for me, it was never about trying to tear down police. I think, of course, police serves their purpose. They're important, and not all police are bad. So that's not the focus. I'm looking at a more macro scale of things. I'm looking at where we're having a deeper issue, and it's more down to self interactions and individual and prejudice. So for me, I think that's one of the things that we should be mostly focusing on. We do have a prejudgment sometimes of individuals. Like for myself, based on my experience previously with someone of a particular color who may not have treated me the best way, I tend to associate that behavior with all people of that color. But I've learned through having positive encounters that should never be the case, and as God would want us to be, of course. But again, we're looking at the fact that we all have prejudice within us, and it's not necessarily that we're bad people. It's just that prejudgment that we impose on others, which is never healthy, and it can create so much problems. So I have learned in my life to look at people for who they are, what they present before me. And if they show me something otherwise, then I will behave accordingly. I will then act accordingly, stay away from that person, etc. But again, this is why I think it's so important to have this conversation. It's not about blacks or whites or us coming against each other. I believe it's so important to have these conversations. So what I would say to Desiree is, you're speaking from one spectrum, but you're not looking at the broader picture. Because for me, I'm not focusing on just police brutality. I'm focusing more on the institutionalized, whether it be covertly or overtly racism that we see taking place. And it does exist. And as black people, I do understand we don't want, for us as individuals, law-abiding, we want equality, we want a better future. We tend to shy away from the reality. So even though many of us, we're living in a fantasy of what the world is, but the reality is that these things actually do exist. Yes, we have racism. Yes, we have prejudice. And yes, it's not just white people that are prejudiced towards blacks. Blacks have that prejudice. But the prejudice I'm talking about is this preconceived notion that their experience or their encounter with a white person is going to be negative. And this is what we need to tackle. The same way, based on a study carried out, reported by the New York Times, a few white officers has basically been candid about their feelings towards a black individual upon approach and what they expect. And it's not that they're aware that they're doing this. It's an unconscious bias that takes place when they have to deal with black men in America. Well, when we're talking about America here, and it's also in the UK, when they speak about this unconscious bias that takes place when they have to deal with black men. They they prejudge their encounter. They expect it to be violent. So this is why we're having these issues. And many of the times when you see a black person being killed by the police, it is through their fear. So they're attributing, or they're associating in aggression with that black individual. As such, their approach, or their approach and how they conduct their job on that given day tends to be aggressive towards the black. Because of the constant conflict going on in the black community, they themselves look upon black. So what you find is that these officers, white officers, they have this, it's like a disdain, disgust towards these black men, because they associate the violence that is taking place in the black community. They associate it with black men, especially if they're dressed that way. So again, psychologically, doing this without knowing that they're prejudging the individual. So some of these officers, yes, they're consciously making these decisions to treat these individuals poorly before they even judged. And then the other officers, they're not consciously making these decisions. So Desiree, to say that we're not having this white supremacist type of behavior in the United States or over the world, it's a false statement, because yes, we're having these white supremacist behavior taking place. Is it everyone and everywhere? No. The same way we can't generalize black people to say every black person just looks like person in terms of a racist way. We have to narrow down to the fact that we have the good, we have the bad, and we have the ugly. It doesn't mean that we're generalizing. It's just pointing out the fact that this exists. Yes, there are white supremacists. We see it on the news where white people are protesting. Yes, the KKK exists. So all of these things are factors that we have to address. And it's not enough to say that it's not okay to say that something don't exist, because that's not your reality. You have to look at the broader issues. And even if it's 1%, it is still a problem. So for me, my focus is never on just police brutality or what happens in the police institutions. My focus is the overall institutionalized racism that we see take place. And yes, these things exist, and it's about tackling it and dealing with these problems in order. It's about having a conversation, both blacks and whites, and how, in order for us to deal with these prejudice and deal with us ourselves as a people and address these internal demons that is actually there, and these internal bias, in order to improve our society. But for me, all in all, I enjoyed doing this review. Desiree is a brilliant young lady, and it's really good to see Jamaicans, doing positive things. Whether it is she's right-winged, it doesn't matter. It's the fact that she's left Jamaica and she's in the US, and she's doing her thing. And it's good to see positive examples, of Jamaicans out there. So of course, it's all about support. And another female, of course, YouTube is saturated with male. So it's good to see, another female, young lady. And again, much respect to her. So it's just, as I said before, it's just my views and what I believe, so it's about individuals taking what they can from it and how we look on the world. And again, it's just a big issue that we need to address, looking at ourselves, looking at our prejudice, looking at the way we approach people, and why we should never look at individuals based on our assumptions. So guys, thank you so much for watching The Essence of May. Thank you for your support. Continue to support the channel, because your help helps me. So subscribe, etc. Bye.